Now, the Second Amendment reads, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." We live in the United States of America, and we have our rights guaranteed by a Constitution. Much ignored today. Many people don't understand it. It's not really taught to our children the way it should be anymore, because we're living in a society that is moving towards globalism and a world government. The United States is a unique experiment in the history of the world because of the freedoms that were guaranteed the American people that prospered this nation for over 200 years. And our founders understood that it was necessary to put a safeguard in the Bill of Rights that would be a help to guarantee the freedoms of the people. And that was that their right to keep, which means to own, and to bear, that means to use and carry in protection of themselves and their families, arms should not be infringed. There's not one iota of evidence that that Second Amendment should ever be infringed upon, as it is many ways today by the gun control crowd and the liberal crowd that wants to take that right away from the American people. Now, you have to understand that the Second Amendment was given to us not about duck hunting, and it's not about target shooting, and it's not about deer hunting, and really, first and foremost, it wasn't even about protecting your family and your home, because that was a given. It was given to protect the people from their government. That if the government should become vile and wicked and tyrannical and oppressive, and if a government should turn on the people so as to subdue them and enslave them, that the people would have the ability to resist, and that this ability to resist the government, the ability to bear arms, would be a hindrance to any totalitarian state thinking that they could easily overwhelm the people of this nation. And that's why that amendment is so important. Obviously, it's also important so that, if someone should break into your home, try to rape your daughter or your wife, or to kill you or harm you and your property, that you would also have the right to protect yourself and defend yourself so that that evil would not be perpetrated upon you. But first and foremost, it's about the people having a means whereby they could resist a tyrannical and evil government. And then secondarily, obviously, for the purpose of home defense, self-defense. I'm often asked, what does the Bible say? Many Christians are confused on this subject. Well, let's go back to the Old Testament. When the Lord gave the commandments to the nation Israel, here's what he says about self-defense in your home. In Exodus chapter 22, verse number 2, we read, "If a thief be found breaking up, and shall be smitten that he die, there shall no blood be shed for him." In other words, if a thief breaks into your home, someone who was not invited, breaks into your home, is there to cause harm, and you kill him or her, you're not guilty of the shedding of their blood, because they're the one who is in the wrong. And of course, nowadays, this is a crazy country. People don't have common sense. We've actually had situations where people have broken into people's homes, were shot, and then wanted to sue the people for shooting them. But, that's where the criminal gets all the rights and the victim has none. But the Bible's very clear that the Lord said, if someone breaks into your home and you defend yourself and you kill them, actually use force enough to kill them, you are not guilty before God, and you shouldn't be guilty before your government. I recommend everybody protect their home with a firearm, know how to use it, and also be willing to use it to defend themselves. If someone breaks into your home in the middle of the evening, You don't know what their intentions are. And you must assume that they're there to do harm, or else they wouldn't be there uninvited in the middle of the evening, would they? And the thing nowadays is people have lost this common sense understanding of life. And it really is a tragic commentary on American society and the weakness of our politicians and the inroads that liberalism and progressivism and really socialist communism have made into our government and into the minds of our leaders, because we'll look at a little bit later as I continue this, answer this question. It's going to take me some time. You'll see that every fascist dictator and communist dictator of the 20th century was for gun control. Now, the only kind of gun control I'm for is aim straight and shoot. Know how to use your gun. Okay? Don't miss when you fire. But their idea of gun control, Mao and Stalin and Lenin and Hitler and Castro and Idi Amin in Uganda and Pol Pot, was to take the weapons away from the people that they were going to enslave and oppress and send off to the camps to die. So right off the bat, the Bible tells us something very important. It tells us that self-defense is fine with God. And if you kill somebody who is in your home uninvited, a thief, someone who's there to perpetrate violence, you're not guilty. Well, people will say, well, wait a minute, doesn't the Bible say thou shalt not kill? Well, then you don't understand the Bible very well, because God actually commanded Israel to kill many people. David was a great warrior. Moses was a great soldier. Joshua was a tremendous warrior, was commanded by God to kill many people. So you don't know your Bible very well. When it says thou shalt not kill, context, it means don't murder. God is against murder. But God is not against self-defense. One is just. When I kill to protect my life and the life of the ones I love, and to protect my freedom, that's a just thing. That's a good thing with God. If I kill unjustly, out of hatred and malice, just to do harm to someone else, well, that's an unjust thing. So when it says thou shalt not kill, it's talking about murder, not about self-defense. Let's make that clear right off the bat. Now, let's turn, people say, well, that's the Old Testament. Well, let's turn to the New Testament. Jesus said, turn the other cheek. Yes, he did. And again, context. What was Jesus talking about? Was he talking about someone that's going to try to rape your wife or daughter, or harm you and kill you, burn down your house, deprive you of your rights and property? Just let him go ahead and do it? Would King David allow that? Would Joshua allow that? Would Moses allow that? Would any Israelite worth their salt allow that as a man? No. The thing is, Jesus was talking about personal insults. When he said turn the other cheek, he was not talking about somebody threatening your life, your liberty, and your property. Okay? You got to get that straight. You got to rightly divide the word of truth. Jesus was talking about personal insults, offenses, words of people, deeds that people do that come short of threatening your life, the lives of your loved ones, your freedom, and your property. God is not a pacifist, and neither was Jesus. I loved when Jesus went into the temple and he made ropes, and he started kicking over the tables of the money changers, and he got the ropes and he started beating them and drove them out of the temple. Because we see that he wasn't a pacifist. There was a time to use violence, to use it in a just way, in a right way. And that's okay with God. In fact, Jesus said something amazing in Luke chapter 22. In verses 35 and 36, prior to his being taken and crucified by his enemies, he said, and he said unto them, when I set you out without purse, now he's speaking to the apostles, in scrip, money, in shoes, lack ye anything? And they said nothing. When they were sent out by the Lord, he provided all their needs. They weren't to make any type of provision for themselves. He said, I'll just take care of you, you go. But now he wasn't going to be on earth with them anymore. And listen to what he says in verse 36. Interesting. to all you pacifist, sissified Christian pastors out there who won't make a statement about this or stand up for it, and who really don't understand who Jesus was. Then said he unto them, but now he that had a purse, let him take it. Now I'm not going to be around anymore. You take it. Provide for yourself. I'm not going to be on earth physically to look out for you. Of course, God in his sovereign providence does watch over our lives. But he also tells us, use the means that I've given you to take care of yourself, to provide for yourself. God's not going to give you food if you don't go to work. And God's not going to protect you if you don't want to use the means to protect yourself. Now listen, it says, let him take it, and likewise his scrip, his money. And he that hath no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. That's an interesting statement. Jesus actually commands them, if you don't have a sword, sell your suit and go buy one. Now you have to understand, well, people say, well, that was a sword. That wasn't an AK-47 or a 40 automatic 45 pistol. Well, which I'm kind of partial to both of those. I own one of each. But you have to understand, the sword was the personal defense weapon of the day. Okay? Just like today, a semi-automatic rifle or an automatic handgun or even a revolver is the standard self-defense weapon. People decide which one they want to choose. In that day, the sword was the standard self-defense weapon. That was the modern weapon of the times. And Jesus said, if you don't got one, you need to protect yourself. Here's what you do. Go sell your garment and get yourself one. Of course, now the apostles said, well, here's two of them. Imagine that. Imagine that. They actually carried two. Look in verse 38. It says, and they said, Lord, behold, here are two swords. And he said unto them, it's enough. Even the apostles who walked with Jesus, who is the omnipotent sovereign Lord, and could miraculously summon legions of angels or speak a word and defeat his enemies at any moment, the apostles saw it necessary to have two weapons, modern weapons of the time, for self-defense while they were walking with Jesus. Now, isn't that an interesting thing? And you get all these pacifists saying, oh, Jesus would never want you to own a gun. I get very disturbed when I hear big-name preachers like John Piper saying that it's unwise for a Christian to own a gun, and Christians shouldn't own a firearm. And we'll talk about him a little later, and that nonsense. Not only is he heretical in teaching about salvation, he's with that Lordship Salvation crowd that said you have to do more than just believe in Jesus to be saved. But he's also way off on this. The man has a double mind and speaks out of both ends of his mouth. But we'll hold off on commenting on that till a little bit later. But the point here is this. Jesus said, you go get one. Now people say, wait a minute. Didn't he say, Peter, put your sword back? When Peter tried to defend him, when they came to take him, he that lives by the sword will die by the sword? Sure he did. Well, what is he, contradicting himself now? No. Context. He told Peter, now is not the time to fight. I've got to go to the what? Cross. If I don't go to the cross, then my mission will not be completed. If you fight my enemies now and kill them, then I can't go to the cross and bear the sins of the world. The plan of God has to be fulfilled. So put the sword away now. And of course, the idea of living by the sword and dying by the sword is not talking about self-defense. It's talking about people who are always looking to harm and hurt. It's talking about men who are what? Dictators and power-hungry, communists and fascists, and thieves and murderers and gangsters. And if you notice, all those who live that way, how do they die? Mussolini lived by the sword. How did he die? They hung him in the square. Okay? After the Second World War was, well, not after it was over, but as it was coming towards an end. Hitler met his demise in a bunker. And according to what's believed by most people, he committed suicide by putting a bullet in his head. You look at the majority of these great dictators, how do they end? By some means of being killed horribly because they lived by the what? So that's what he's talking about. All right, so let's continue on a little bit here and let's go a little further. Over in Luke chapter 11, Jesus makes another interesting statement. And you say, okay, well, all right, so you mean we're actually we can own a modern means of self-defense and protect ourselves? Sure, because look what Jesus said in Luke chapter 11, verse 21. He said, when a strong man armed keepeth his palace, and the word keepeth means to guard, his goods are in what? Peace. So if a man has a home, a palace, and of course every man's home is his palace, it may be a small little hut, but to that man, that's his home. That's his palace. That's his place of security, and where he goes to find peace and rest with his family. And it says, when a strong man armed keepeth his palace, or guards it, his goods are in peace. In other words, when you are armed, you can protect the sanctity of your home. And you can be at peace. And you don't have to live in fear that a threat greater than you will come and do you harm in the place where you desire to enjoy what? Peace with those that you love. And then it says in verse 22, but when a stronger than he shall come upon him and overcome him, he taketh from him all his armor wherein he trusted, and divideth the spoils. Notice he makes another tremendous statement. He says, now if someone who is armed with something stronger than what he possesses, the man who owns the home, he can come in and what? Take that home. I often hear people say, well, you know, I don't need a firearm. They're dangerous because they don't understand firearms and don't know how to use them. All right? So they have this fear. And but I'll protect myself with a baseball bat. So you'll club somebody over the head and kill them, which is much more messier, okay, and difficult than shooting someone with a bullet, which is a lot more formidable and more able to protect your family and keep its safety. People say, I'll use a knife. Also, you'll stab someone to death. That's very messy. It's not very reliable. And you'll do that, but you won't use a gun or a bullet. It doesn't make sense, does it? Now, Jesus says, if all you have is a bat and the guy that's breaking into your house has a 12-gauge shotgun, he's stronger than you, and guess what? He's going to take your goods. So what is the Lord saying? He's saying that we should absolutely have the optimum amount of what? Firepower that's necessary to protect our home. You see? He's not against that. Because if you have a modern weapon, again, an automatic rifle, automatic pistol, you're at least going to be on par with someone who tries to harm you if they break into your home. And many times you'll have more firepower than the crook who came in, because many times they'll have just a knife or a club or something like that. So you will have the advantage. So again, we see the Bible makes an interesting statement about self-defense. And we can see all along here, we don't see anything in the Bible against it, do we? In fact, everything the Bible is saying is pro-self-defense. Now, the Bible also says something. I'd like to talk to Christian men, because today we have in the church a lot of men who have become feminized. The whole society, men have become very feminized. And, you know, the Bible says in 1 Timothy 5:8 that if any man does not provide for his own, he's worse than an infidel. He's worse than the unbeliever. And of course, strictly speaking, that's talking about materially. Make sure that you work and you provide the needs of your family. But you know something? Within that statement, there's also something very important to realize. As a man, God calls me, not just, when he says provide for your family, he also means what? Provide for their safety. Protect them. It's my job as a man to do everything that I can to make sure that my family is safe and secure in their home. And really safe and secure wherever they go. Okay? And this is why owning a firearm is something that I believe every Christian man should do, and learn how to use it and train his family how to use it. Now, in Proverbs, it tells us something in Proverbs 25. Again, what's the biblical principle that we always find? To resist what? Evil. What's a Christian to do? Resist what? Evil. Resist evil. In Proverbs chapter 25:26, it says, a righteous man falling down before the wicked is as a troubled fountain in a corrupt spring. In other words, he's useless. He can provide no help. A righteous man falling down before the wicked is as a troubled fountain in a corrupt spring. A godly man who will not provide a means of self-defense for himself and his loved ones is basically bowing down before the wicked. And God says he's useless. He's like a corrupt spring. He's like water that's you can't drink. There's no purpose to it. There's no usefulness to it. And Christian men have to think about these things. I'm to work and to provide for my family's need. I'm to teach them and lead them spiritually in the ways of the Lord, set an example for them of godliness, and I am to protect them and ensure their safety so that they can live a life in security and peace. Now, I like to go a little further here, and I like to turn, and if you have a Bible and you want to turn with me, you can turn to 1 Samuel chapter 13. Now, nowadays, there's all this voices saying that we got to stop the violence. Listen, you're never going to stop violence in this world. All you can do is protect yourself from it. It's like poor. Jesus said, the poor you'll have with you always. Should we try to help the poor as Christians? Yes. The government's been having the war on poverty since the Lyndon Johnson's Great Society in the 60s. Spent probably $1 trillion, and we've got more poor people now than we've ever had. Government doesn't solve problems. Okay, they can't solve the problem of poverty. Well, what are you against, helping the poor? No. I'm for individuals helping their neighbor. I'm for the church helping their own and their neighbor. But I'm not for the government taking money out of people's pockets, which basically amounts to thievery, and taking it from people who work hard and giving it to people who don't want to get off their you-know-what, or who are just continually making bad decisions with getting pregnant when they shouldn't be, multiple pregnancies when men don't want to take care of their kids and take off, or drug abuse or alcohol abuse, or 100 other wrong decisions they make to reward people who make bad decisions and take the money from those who make good decisions and give it to those who make bad. That's unjust. But that's another story for another time. Maybe we'll tackle that subject in the future too. But the point I'm trying to make is, today we have to realize that we're being constantly told that we don't have the right to have these arms because we've got to stop all the violence in society. Listen, you're never going to stop all the violence in society because you can't legislate the human heart. It's like back about a year ago, they had a big push for more laws to protect battered women. And they made all these laws how they're going to punish men who, batter women around. And you say, well, aren't you for helping women who are battered? Absolutely. But let me ask you a question. You think because Washington, D.C. passed a law that told somebody, don't beat up your wife, that some jerk who's a vile brute is going to stop beating up his wife? Just by passing that law, you think that's going to happen? And now you're going to throw millions of dollars into that program, and you're not going to solve the problem. Millions, you're going to throw billions into it. No, you can't change people's hearts. So it's the same way. There's always going to be violence. So the only way, you can't stop some nut who wants to take a gun and run into the post office and shoot people up. Right? Can't do it. Only way you could stop him is if someone there has a weapon and what? Fires back. You see? And all these gun-free zones, all they do, you know what these gun-free zones do? Post office, public buildings, college campuses, schoolyards. You know what it says? It tells the predator, go ahead, here's your opportunity, because nobody there has got the means of resisting you. So take your gun and go in there, and guess what? You can go crazy and kill a bunch of people, and nobody will be able to what? Protect themselves. That's all that these gun-free zones do, is provide opportunity for the wackos to go ahead and perpetrate their violence. So the only way to stop violence is to meet violence with a greater what? Force. That's what Jesus said. The strong man who's armed, he keepeth what? His goods. He protects them. That's how you do it. Of course, that's common sense, and that's not found very much in the United States nowadays. In 1 Samuel chapter 13, the nation Israel was in a very, very difficult position because the Philistines had gained some power over them, and the Philistines withheld from the people of Israel the ability to make modern weapons. It says in verse 19 of 1 Samuel chapter 13, now there was no smith. Okay, and a smith is someone who makes objects out of metal, like spears and swords, knives, etc. There was no smith found throughout all the land of Israel. So in all the land of Israel, there were no smiths. In other words, there were no men capable of taking metals and fashioning them into what? Weapons. For the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make swords and spears. The Philistines knew we can't oppress them and control them if they have the ability to what? Make modern weapons of defense for that time, right? And so they outlawed it, you see. There was no metal workers, and the enemies of Israel were able to enslave them because they wouldn't allow them to make these weapons. They had their gun control of that day. See? And all it did was put Israel in a position of being oppressed and not being able to resist their enemies. Do you ever think about that? The nation Israel was in a position where they were not able to make weapons so that they could protect their people. It's a strange thing, isn't it? Today in the United States of America, we have all these people pointing to the wackos, and there are only a few. We've got 80 million gun owners in the United States. 80 million. And you've got a handful in the course of a year, 5 or 6 nuts, a dozen nuts if you want, which amounts to such a minute percentage of the law-abiding citizens who own weapons that go crazy and do crazy things. So you think by taking the guns away from the 79,900,090 people who are doing it lawfully and right to stop the 10 or 12 that go crazy, deprive these people of their rights, that's nonsense. That's ridiculous. Okay? And it doesn't solve the problem because you know what? There's plenty of stories you read where people... I remember a nightclub in New York a couple of years back where a fella got mad because his girlfriend was dating some other guy. He blocked up both exits while people were partying and drinking and dancing, poured gasoline and lit the whole club on fire. Killed a few hundred people. If someone wants to perpetrate violence, there's plenty of ways of doing it without a firearm, okay? So this is just nonsense. But of course, there's always Christians who don't understand. What bothers me more than anything is how Christians should know better if they really study their Bible. But Christians are so superficial today and really don't spend enough time studying the Word of God in depth and trying to find out what does the Bible say about these various subjects. The reason I know this stuff from the Bible because I took the time. I didn't want to hear what some preacher who was sissified and feminine, okay, and acted hyper-spiritual, who walks around with a halo over his head and self-righteous, told me about the Bible and self-defense. I want to know what the Bible says. And I got a whole different story from studying the Scriptures. And we'll give you more of those Scriptures as we go along. But, you know, the hyper-spiritual crowd will say things like this. Well, I don't need a gun. I'll just trust the Lord. Really? Okay, do you buy health insurance? Well, yeah. Why don't you just trust the Lord to pay the health bills? When you get sick and you owe the doctor $25,000 for the operation, why don't you just trust the Lord? Do you buy car insurance? Yeah. Well, why don't you just trust the Lord? When your car gets wrecked, the Lord will provide you the $15,000-$20,000 you need to get a new car. Do you lock your doors at night? Well, of course. Well, why not just leave them open and just trust the Lord? You're so spiritual. When you get sick, do you go to a doctor? Yeah. And take the medication he gives you? Yeah. Well, then you don't have any common sense then, because you'll do all those things to take care of yourself and provide for yourself to ensure your security and safety, and yet you won't own a firearm and learn how to use it properly and safely so that you can protect yourself or your family. And then you'll support these liberal politicians who want to do away with the right to bear arms in this country. No, there's too many, I told you already, pious and sissified and hyper-spiritual, self-righteous people running around who are just conceited in their own views, who don't understand these scriptural principles that we're talking about. And it really makes me sick. As I mentioned, Joshua and David were great warriors. I wonder what they would think about all these liberal preachers today and all these sissified Christians who won't be manly and stand up for the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, and the self-defense of their homes and their family, and above all else, their rights. And that brings up another point. The militia, according to what the Federalist Papers were when they were written, was the people. And the people were responsible for their own defense. And have you ever read the story of Abraham in Genesis chapter 14? Genesis, people always say today, oh, well, you got all these crazy right-wing militias running around. Actually, for every one that might be crazy, there's probably 100 that are just regular guys who understand the Constitution and are actually taking a stand to stand up and do something to protect themselves, their families, and their community. Okay? And of course, the communists and the socialists and the progressives and the liberals and the fascists, they don't like that. Solzhenitsyn, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who spent over 20 years in the prison camps, the gulags of Russia, when he was released and he came to America, he said, and you can read this quote in his writings, he said that when the secret police came to take the people out of their homes, that if the people would have just resisted, and at that point they had their guns were taken away from them by Stalin, but if they had took a pitchfork or a knife or a club, and when the secret police came in to carry them away to the death camps, if they had resisted and beaten them and harmed them, killed them, then what happened in Russia in those death camps for decades would have never happened, because those secret police also have a wife and kids at home. And if they feared, I'm going out tonight to round up thousands of people to bring them to the death camps, but they might fight back and I could die, guess what? They're not going to go out and do their job because they want to go home to their families. And Solzhenitsyn said he wished that the people had understood that all they had to do was resist the tyranny, and they wouldn't have had to suffer in those camps. You see, because one thing that oppressive government loves is to propagandize people who are just simple sheep and lead them to believe the wrong things and lead them to believe that it's wrong to resist tyranny. It is not wrong to resist tyranny. You need to know your rights, people, and you need to know that you should stand up for those rights, because let me tell you something, if we as citizens don't stand up for our rights, there's no one else that's gonna. Now, in Genesis chapter 14, Lot got taken captive. He was carried away in all his possessions. And the Bible says, and they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals and went their way. And they took Lot, Abraham's brother's son, his nephew, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods. And there came one that had escaped and told Abraham the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, the brother of Aner, and these were confederate with Abraham. They had made a union with Abraham, a pact to help each other. And when Abraham heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants. He didn't call the police. He armed his trained servants. Didn't have a police force in those days. I'm not saying don't call the police. Follow the law and call the police. But here's the problem with calling the police. The police are not going to protect you. They're going to come after the crime has been perpetrated. You're in your home, the intruder breaks in, he steals, he rapes, he shoots, maybe he kills, maybe he stabs, maybe he beats. Then he leaves, and then maybe someone survives and calls what? 911. And then who comes? The police. But they come after the crime has already been perpetrated and the offender is what? Gone. And perhaps they may find the offender And perhaps they may bring him to justice. Perhaps they won't. But maybe they will. Then, best scenario, they find him. They get evidence and they find him. And they bring him to justice. And hopefully he gets, the full weight of the law against him and he gets punished for his crimes. But here's the problem. Whoever's been hurt, killed, maimed, or harmed is still the same way. You see? They're either dead, maimed, or harmed, or scarred. You see? And what was lost is never going to be brought back. Because the police come after the fact. You see? But if the person who had the intruder break into his home was armed and capable of defending himself, good chance there wouldn't be any raping or pillaging or maiming or harm done. You see? And that's what you have to understand. I'm not saying don't call the police, but I'm just telling you, the police aren't going to protect you. They're not going to protect you. They find criminals after the what? Fact. After the harm is already done, they find out who did it. Whoopee! And then you get liberal judges who won't even what? Punish them. We've got guys who've committed murder. There are literally thousands of people who've committed murder who are out walking the streets in the United States of America. Just read a story last week when I was in Florida of a fellow who raped and killed a young student on the University of Florida campus, and I believe it was 1985. And that was after he had served 9 years previously for murder, and he was let out. And he only served 9 years for murder, got out. Who knows what the reason was, the technicality, but whatever it is, he got out, and then he raped and murdered again, and then he did it several other times, and then finally he was put back in prison for abducting a 15-year-old girl, raping her. He didn't kill her. She escaped. They found him. He went to prison to serve a life sentence, and he died in prison and started confessing to a bunch of other crimes that he committed after he had served 9 years for murder and had gotten out. See? It would have been a lot better if that young girl had carried a firearm with her, a .380, good gun for a woman. And when the man tried to abduct her and rape her, she could have blown his head off. She'd still be alive today, be married and have some kids, and her parents wouldn't be grieving and weeping over it.